Bridge USA, let's get on our feet and give a very warm welcome to our co-hosts of today's conversation, a Starting Point co-founders and actors, Chris Evans and Mark Kassen.
How you doing? Hey, everybody. How are ya? Thank you. We're here for you guys.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you. So great to see everybody. We are so happy to be here to do this conversation, this bipartisan conversation with the HiIl. We are especially excited to be here with BridgeUSA. We love Bridge. I think 4 years ago is when we first started working with y'all. You had 20 chapters, I believe, across the country, across college campuses, and you now have over 60 and 17 in high schools. It's incredibly inspiring. It's incredibly amazing. It's why we're so inspired to keep partnering with you on our common mission to uplift civil discourse and engagement amongst young folks around the country.
Yeah, we started ASP 4 years ago now with the goal of creating a civic engagement platform to try and help demystify some issues specifically for young folks like you. We're very excited today to have Illinois Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy and former Congressman Peter Roskam to have a discussion with you folks about civic engagement.
Yeah, really excited. And I know that you all know that this conversation is really important right now. In this time, we can all agree that the tenor around political discourse and the heat could really use to come down a bunch. And to that end, we are really excited to have this talk around the culture of communication in politics and an exchange of different ideas and sort of being able to listen and learn a little bit and not just shout at each other the way a lot of other folks do. To that end, we are going to bring on Michael Schell from the HiIl, who's going to help lead our conversation. Michael? Good to see you.
Thanks so much.
Chris and I are going to go take off, and we'll come back and do a Q&A with all of you when you're done.
We're very excited to have everyone here today. We've got a fantastic panel coming up. Former congressman, current congressman, going to talk about civic engagement, young Gen Z voters. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get into it. First up, Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy. He's a Democrat from Illinois. And then we have former Congressman Peter Roskam. He was a congressman from 2017 to 2019, and he's currently the leader of the federal policy team at Baker Hostetler. So, Congressman, thanks for joining us. So I want to start off with some news of the day, but also tied into Gen Z voters. So there's a study at Tufts University that says that 41 million members of Gen Z will be eligible to vote in 2024. Massive number, some of them right here with us. It's a large part of the electorate, and one of the big themes of this 2024 election was, well, it's two old guys who are running again. They both want to be in the White House again. Obviously, that's not the case. There's been some excitement jolted into the race on both sides. Vice President Kamala Harris being at the top of the ticket for Democrats, Senator J.D. Vance, a younger face, being vice presidential nominee for Republicans. So I'm curious to ask you both, do you think that both of those selections will energize the respective party bases, and do you think they'll be effective in energizing and getting younger voters to the ballot box? Congressman, I'll start with you.
Yes, the short answer is yes, I think so. I think that especially with, yesterday I was knocking on doors in Wisconsin, and the excitement, enthusiasm, and energy is just off the charts for Kamala Harris. And I think that the next step is really to engage Gen Z folks and others on the issues that matter to them. So there's excitement and enthusiasm, but we have to talk about the issues that matter and the problems and how we would address them. So provided we could do that, I think there's going to be a turnout similar to what happened in 2020, which was a record turnout for millennials and younger voters and Gen Z folks. But I see a lot of enthusiasm even among these people based on what I saw yesterday, and I think it's going to build from here.
Congressman Roskam.
My sense is that there's a real opportunity for younger voters to have an incredible impact. And I think it's incumbent upon the candidates themselves. Once the shine wears off on new face of a candidacy, it's the responsibility of a campaign to reach out and to say, here's why what I'm talking about matters. Here's why what I'm proposing matters to you. And it's, I think, incumbent upon younger voters to really dial in on that, to say, listen, I've got, this is my future we're talking about. This is just incredibly important. So I agree with Raja that there's an excitement that's been infused into the campaign, but the excitement can be short-lived if the campaigns don't translate that into really substantive issues. And I think that that's what we're going to see over the next 100 days.
Yeah, it's the honeymoon period that both sides are hoping lasts forever. Another, keeping on the idea of current events, a few weeks ago we saw the assassination attempt on the life of former President Trump. And after that, there was this period of a little bit of unity in a sense. Both campaigns were leaning back and holding off on those really personal and bitter attacks. That, though, was short-lived, and we're now back to the political mudslinging that is so common in our politics today. So first, just if we can reflect on this political moment, is there a time in previous elections that you've seen so much breaking news and the race be shaken up in so many different ways? And second, talk about the importance of this civil discourse and this unity message, especially among young voters and on places like college campuses. Roscoe?
My sense is that we would be wise to reflect back historically. There was a time, and there's a book that I commend to you called Those Angry Days. It's by an historian, Lynn O'Brien. And she writes about the time right before America went to war in the Second World War. And it was spicy, it was vitriolic, there were voices of isolationism. And it's the story of Franklin Roosevelt and Charles Lindbergh, who is a leading isolationist. And what I didn't realize was how toxic the conversation was in this country until Pearl Harbor. Now, am I suggesting that we're at that point now? No, but I think there's, it can be overwhelming sometimes, particularly if you've been born within the last 20 years to say, wow, I'm completely freaking out. This is so overwhelming, I don't know how to deal with this. And I think it is incumbent upon us to say, no. Our country has been through a lot of stuff. And are we in a time where there's a lot of political turbulence? Of course we are. That's self-evident. And it's exacerbated by the pace at which we're communicating. And I'm sure we'll end up talking about this more. So I think yes, Michael, it is happening. Things are happening fast. All these events are really cascading, and they feel like they're rushing. And yet, this is not new for our country. And I think we would be wise to step back and say, okay, we can handle this, and we can make a difference here, but to recognize it and to not be intimidated by it.
Congressman?
I echo those sentiments. I think that 3 weeks ago, I think lawmakers were genuinely upset and horrified by what happened to former President Donald Trump. He was, this close from no longer being with us, and I think that that's what also prompted, by the way, the bipartisan hearings with regard to the Secret Service, where I had a chance to interrogate the Secret Service director, and on a bipartisan basis, we basically asked for her resignation, and some things should be outside of the realm of partisanship, and one of them is safety. People's safety. It's one thing to talk, it's another thing to say words that could incite violence or encourage violence. And right now, we're in a moment, folks, where unfortunately there is a segment of actually both extremes that believes that they can resolve political disagreements through force. This has been shown by Robert Pape, a world-famous political scientist at the University of Chicago, who showed that around 20% of Americans think that we should actually resolve our disagreements through force. In that same survey, it showed that 74% of Americans want elected officials and others to uniformly condemn political violence and say that no disagreement should be resolved through force, but rather through coming to the table and basically peacefully resolving your differences. And that's something that you folks as leaders and people of goodwill need to reinforce every single day.
So let's sort of talk about that and dive a little deeper on that. The idea of civil discourse being so imperative to American democracy and to having this entire system work properly, that a lot of the time starts on college campuses, and it's really important on college campuses. So Congressman Krishnamurthy, I'll go back to you because I know that you've had legislation about this. I have the name here. It's the Help Students Vote Act, which is about helping students register to vote on college campuses, but also just to have that moment of civil discourse and conversation on college campuses. Talk about why that is the important venue for these conversations to start, and if you start to have that mindset there, will those younger voters then take it with them as they grow older?
Totally. I think that, first of all, I'm so honored to be here with BridgeUSA, and you folks are having very difficult conversations back at your home campuses, trying to bring people together in a very turbulent moment. So hats off to you. But you are at ground zero, in my humble opinion, of where these productive conversations need to start, where you can talk about you can disagree without being disagreeable. You can actually say, okay, you can listen as much as you talk, and you can say, where do you come from? What's your point of view on this? This is where I come from, and this is where my point of view is, and this is where we can actually work on an issue together where we agree, and then set aside some of our disagreements until we can build some trust. If we can build those types of leadership muscles, so to speak, on our college campuses, that can translate into incredible productive work long term to help to change the discourse, to lower the toxicity levels. I'll just say one anecdote and then I'll turn it over to Peter. When I first came into Congress, my wife told me to join the gym. And I said, okay, I'll join the gym. And then she's like, did you join the gym? Did you join the gym? I was like, okay, fine, I'll join the gym. So I joined the gym, and they assigned me to a locker, okay? And they put my name on the locker and stuff. It turns out, Peter, that my locker was right next to none other than Speaker Paul Ryan's locker. And Paul Ryan obviously is a Republican, a conservative Republican, like Peter. And I didn't know exactly how to conduct myself, but the protocol in the gym is you don't talk politics. Okay? You're supposed to talk about anything else except politics. So I learned on my first day in the gym with Paul Ryan, we came to work out at the same time, that he's a Cubs fan. And he grew up as a Cubs fan like me because that's the only channel that played in Janesville, Wisconsin. And so we talked about the Cubs every day. We talked about family every day. We started talking about other stuff. And then one day, Michael, I mustered the courage to bring up a bill that had been repeatedly stalled in the House,
breaking
Peter.
Breaking the rules.
I was breaking protocol, but basically it was about revolutionizing our nation's skills-based education system, which is the education system for the 2/3 of Americans who don't go to college, four-year university. And so I said, Paul, this is not getting a vote. What the hell's going on? And so he said, okay, we're not supposed to talk about this, but I'll look into it. So he did, and he found out what the obstacle was. We corrected the language. It got a vote in the House and in the Senate. It got signed into law. And that all started by going to the gym.
Deal making doesn't happen in smoke-filled rooms. It happens in sweaty gyms.
It happens in gyms. It happens in places where you can find relationships. That's what, if there's one takeaway for me, for you, for all of today, is form relationships, okay? Identify your common humanity. Start from there and then talk about other stuff. Because if you can do that, then that will withstand the test of, the partisanship and the other stuff that happens in the atmosphere.
Peter, I want to get you in, Congressman Roscoe, I want to get you in on this also, just the idea of relationships. In Congress, a lot of the time those relationships are created on the House floor. The cameras aren't showing folks in the pews. That's where lawmakers can have those bipartisan conversations. Talk about the importance of those relationships and also bringing it back to the idea of it's important to harbor those conversations, that mindset of civil discourse on college campuses, because folks will take it with them as they grow older.
A couple things come to mind, Michael. One is I served in the Illinois State Senate down in Springfield, which only had 59 members. And the House of Representatives has 435 members. Now, 59 members, you're physically present with one another based on the rules of the Illinois General Assembly. You are interacting frequently on a personal level. And the net effect of that is a restraining influence about what you'll say about somebody. Because you know what? You're going to see them in 2 hours. They're going to be walking right past you, as opposed to the structure of Congress, unfortunately, right now, 435 members. I'll tell you, there were times when I wasn't sure if somebody was a member of Congress or not, because they were coming in and coming out, and if they didn't have the lapel pin that Raj is wearing today, I thought they might have been a tourist. So the physical proximity, Michael, and the physical presence with one another is a restraining influence, and I would argue a very, very good thing. But I think one of the subtexts that you as a group can communicate back on college campuses is really to intentionally resist the temptation of cynicism about our public life. Let me tell you one quick story. I was out to lunch with an old Sunday school teacher of mine, a really wealthy guy, and during the course of a discussion, I asked him, what's it like to be so rich? I'm willing to learn, but I said, what's it like to be so wealthy? Because you can write a check and your name is on the side of a building, you got all these people hustling you and so forth. And he said something, and I'm going to share it with you, that changed my attitude. And this is what he said. He said, Peter, guard your heart against cynicism. Nothing good comes from a cynical heart. He goes, if someone's manipulating me, that's their problem. That's not my problem. And when I heard that, I was about 40 years old, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, and it completely changed my disposition. And I think what the challenge is right now, and I think you find yourself in this milieu, cynicism is kind of cool. Cynicism is clever. Cynicism says, oh, I understand what's going on and everybody else is a fool. And yet it is dark and it is destructive and it is really, really corrosive. So as you're approaching politics and you are approaching others on campus, I would really encourage you to recognize the temptation of cynicism and to walk away. Now, I'm not here pumping sunshine. I'm not here saying, oh, this is so great, and it's like 8th grade civics. No. It's a rough and tumble arena. But the disposition and the attitude with which one approaches this can be incredibly fruitful. And I think what Raja and I are seeing today are faces and hopefully voices in a Q&A, but dispositions that say, we really want to change this. And I think you have an incredible opportunity to do so. And so don't squander this moment. Don't squander this inflection point in history where you can make an incredible difference for the long run.
I want to dive into that. This was a question I had. There was a study from UC Berkeley that says younger voters, Gen Z, millennials, they're feeling more fatalistic when it comes to the future and what the future has to hold. They're pessimistic about government's ability to solve some of their challenges. There was a quote in this study that I found striking. It said that young people have, quote, an increasing feeling of fatalism and a sense that the American dream is farther and farther out of reach. As politicians, how can you guys change that mindset? And how could these young voters themselves change that mindset? Because at such a young age, to have a fatalistic mindset about how American politics and government works, you want to be able to set the trajectory properly at that young age.
I think we got to start solving problems. We got to start actually, putting points on the board, so to speak, in terms of helping young people, but all people, with some of the basic stuff that doesn't get fixed, that needs to get fixed to improve their lives. I'll just give you a couple examples real quick, so perhaps you know this, but I'm an immigrant. I'm one of the few naturalized citizens in Congress, and so this issue of immigration and fixing our legal immigration system is deeply personal and also professional to me. Why is it professional? 30% of my 750,000 residents, so 750,000 people, 30% of them were born outside the United States. So they come to me all the time with, I have numerous DACA folks who are trying to regularize their status. I have the children of H-1B visa holders who are trying to stay here and because they're going to age out of their status. I've got others who are just trying to work through the system, and yet it is so bureaucratic and so messed up that they are waiting in queues for decades, trying to do the right thing, but they can't seem to land on their feet, and they're living in fear. So we got to fix that legal immigration system to let them to start to work on their American dream. A second issue, which bothers me a lot too, housing. Housing is through the roof in terms, sorry for the pun. It is so freaking expensive in the Chicago area, probably in your areas as well. And yet, Peter and I know one of the things that we can do to help to resolve this housing problem is make it easier to build housing. Solve the regulatory red tape that prevents multifamily housing from popping up all over our country, including, by the way, in our suburbs. It can't be that, every parcel of land can only have a single family house. When you restrict the amount of housing, then you drive up housing costs. And you don't have the chance to own a home eventually, or to build your wealth in a house, or to buy a house. So that's why I think that government starting to solve problems is so essential for lowering cynicism, and then to also get more engagement and better government over time.
Congressman Roscom, your thoughts here?
I think part of the challenge is to recognize that we are an instant gratification culture. We want what we want when we want it. And I'm right at the head of this parade. I think, though, that our system of governance is not designed to get things done quickly. It's designed to take incremental steps. And here's part of the proof of that. Thomas Jefferson was no stranger to big vision. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, obviously. And yet 14 years after he wrote the Declaration of Independence, he wrote a letter to a guy named Charles Clay, and I'm going to give you 3 lines from this letter. He said, "The ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. We need to be connected with what we can, satisfied with what we can get from time to time, and eternally press forward with what is yet to get. It takes time to persuade men to do what is for their own good." So take Raj's example. The notion of an all-or-nothing immigration remedy is a pipe dream, in my view. It's too much. It's too far. The politics of fixing it all at once are too overwhelming. And yet, you could break down part of that based on Raj's description of it to say, okay, let's settle in on DACA. Then let's talk about border security. Then let's talk about H-1B and so forth. You take my point. Break this down. And I think if your generation, if you guys, when you're back on campus, you begin to look at smaller steps that can be cumulative over time, it can be a massive impact. But the notion of saying, I'm going to get this all done instantly, and I'm not going to be satisfied unless it's all done, is setting us up for failure. So I would say incrementalism is the best approach to governance.
Another question I wanted to ask, and this may be feeding into the fatalistic outlook that some young voters have, is there's research that shows that younger Democrats are sort of feeling less connected with the Democratic Party because they're leaning more left. Younger conservatives may be feeling more disconnected with the Republican Party because they're leaning more moderate. How do politicians and political leaders go ahead with this? Do the parties need to recalibrate, or do they need to change their thinking and how they have more of a big tent and bring in some of these younger voters? Because remember, in a few years, these younger voters are eventually going to be the majority of the group. So how do political leaders react to this change in tone among younger voters?
I think you have to have a big tent. You have to bring every voice in, and you have to allow every voice to express themselves, to be able to properly reflect what folks believe, what folks want. My only humble observation is that even at the same time that we are reflective of that we get things done. What do I mean by that? I think the more that our parties, the two parties, gravitate toward the corners on any issue, it doesn't have to be progressive or super conservative, it just has to be something where they're not meeting in the middle or meeting in some place where they can actually get something done. Again, we feed into that horrible spiral where people get more cynical about government. People get less engaged in government. The reasonable, rational people say, you know what, I'm going to go spend my time doing something else instead of government because nothing can get done there. And then you know what happens? The crazies take over. And crazy is ugly. I have been there when crazy has taken over. And we're in a situation where if we allow that to happen, then, you know, it reminds me of that old Native American saying, inside of us is a good wolf and a bad wolf, and the wolf that you become is the wolf you feed. And if you feed crazy wolf, guess what happens? We have to feed the good wolf inside of each of us. We have to aspire to our greatest ideals. We have to make sure that we aspire to a country that lives up to the promise that I think all of you believe in. That's why you're here today. You're trying to form that bridge. And so that's what I try to do, even at the same time I'm listening to all the voices in my party or anybody who might disagree with me.
And Congressman Roscom, I want to give you another statistic as food for thought when you dive into this. There was a Pew Research poll back in April that found that for voters between the ages of 18 and 24, 66% lean Democrat, 34 lean Republican. So that's a 32% difference in favor of Democrats. How can the Republican Party better target these voters and bring them into the group?
Look, it's heads up. I mean, what you're describing is an incredible target of opportunity for the GOP, and they just need to be smart about it. And I think both political parties are going to be aggressively competing for your demographic because, as you pointed out, Michael, that's the future. I think that there's an opportunity strategically for you all to consider a specific role that you can play on campus, and particularly as you interact with candidates. When you interact with candidates, I think it would be a very interesting thing to inquire of them, what have you done? What have you accomplished? I'm less interested in really litigating and having a discussion about what your positions are, candidate. I'm interested in what you have gotten done. Because I would imagine, I know this because I've borne witness to this, if you were to ask that question of Congressman Christian Morthy, he would be able to go through a litany of things that he's been able to accomplish in a highly charged political environment. That is no small accomplishment. And yet, he's not a pushover. I mean, the man's got a worldview, he's got a way of looking at things, and he's got a disposition and an approach. But he's able to point to being able to persuade people on the other side of the aisle to vote for things that he's initiated. And I think that if that becomes a standard that you all take into the dialogue, that can be a strategic imperative where in 10 years we're having a very different conversation. And candidates aren't starting just using phrases like bumper stickers, but they're actually saying, no, hey, listen, I've been able to work with so-and-so on the other side of the aisle. We've been able to do this, that, or the other thing. I've got X number of folks on the other side of the aisle that have co-sponsored my bill, co-signed my letter. I've done all these sorts of things. That is new. That is not the way candidates are, by and large, evaluated right now. And if what comes out of this movement is a shift in disposition to say, I'm not interested in platitudes, I'm not interested in just sort of harsh phrases, but I'm interested in hearing results, or if you don't have results, what's your plan to implement this, Mr. or Mrs. Congressman, as you're trying to get this done? I think that there's a huge opportunity, Michael, for this group to make that kind of difference.
Sort of a little bit of a jump off that. You can't have a conversation about young voters without talking about social media. And I'm going to tell you, I'm Gen Z, but I had to study when writing this question. A lot of folks are right now talking about what brat means. A lot of people are talking about the Kamala Harris coconut meme. I've seen former President Trump post pictures, post videos with, where's his name? I have it right here. Jake Paul, an actor and a wrestler. He also went golfing with Bryson DeChambeau. I mean, folks are laughing, and this has gotten a lot of attention. But are these messaging tactics effective, you think, in bringing in younger voters? Because, you know, I'm Gen Z, but I'm not very online. I had to look into what this means. But a lot of folks, this translates with them, and this could get them excited and send them to the ballot box. So talk about the importance of social media, but also these memes and these different videos trying to bring in this new part of the electorate.
You're definitely Brett.
I think I'll take that as a good thing.
I think.
Okay.
So look, I think that here's my. I think it's so fun to see these Kamala memes online. I think they're so joyful. They kind of point to that energy and enthusiasm that I was talking about before, and it's refreshing. Okay. I think I have two observations about social media. One is that social media connects us in a way that perhaps we weren't able to be connected in the past. But my big concern about social media is twofold. One, I think it has, because of the algorithms that are programmed, it feeds content to people that drives them further into corners away from each other. So ironically, even though it was meant to connect people, the algorithms drive people apart. Okay, so you end up in silos online the same way that you might be in silos in society, which I think defeats the point of social media. The second is there's a lot of misinformation on social media, okay? And it could be planted by foreign state actors, or it could be domestic. But one of the things I'd like to see is I'd like to remove the loophole in Section 230 of the Communications and Decency Act, sorry to get super technical, which enables big tech to essentially escape liability for false, misleading, or outright just wrong content online. That could be dangerous, okay? And big tech wants to be treated as a big community bulletin board as opposed to being publishers, which I think they are, who should be held accountable for their content. And I know this is very controversial, but I think there are increasing numbers of lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats, who want to come together on this. Hopefully, eventually we'll get to it, but that's my observation about social media, in addition to the fact that I love those Kamala videos.
I saw Congressman Eric Swalwell the other day walking down the House steps drinking from a coconut, and he was like, I'm just enjoying an afternoon refreshing snack. So people are trying to use it. Congressman Roscom?
Look, it's a real mixed bag, as Raja pointed out, and it's here to stay. Now, you have the advantage of being native in this, and which I don't. I'm calling my children constantly about how to do things, and they're very patient with me. But it's not a panacea, that's for sure. And getting back to the relationships that Raja was talking about, relationships aren't developed by shooting tweets out. Relationships aren't developed, by sitting on a corner and looking at memes on the phone. Relationships are developed by intentionally being present with one another. So I would urge you to say, yeah, listen, social media is here, social media is influential, social media is going to be a tool that we can use. But if social media itself becomes an obstacle or crowds out other time that you have to actually be intentional on campus about connecting with somebody over a cup of coffee, then I would say chuck the iPhone and spend the time with people who can really make a difference.
I'm being told we're almost out of time, so I've got one more question. It's a two-parter to end on an optimistic note. Why should the country be optimistic and excited about these young voters coming up and becoming involved in the electorate? And what's just your final parting message to them as they enter into this really important phase of life, being part of the electorate, having a vote, and having their say in American democracy?
So there's an old saying in Washington, D.C., if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And you folks cannot... I don't want any of you or your families or communities to be on the menu. So this is what I think the three things I would request you to do, okay? First, you got to vote if you're voting age. If you're voting age, you must register to vote and you must vote. I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, unaffiliated, whatever, you got to vote because your vote is your voice, okay? And you don't, unfortunately, this cohort, 18 to 24, we need to have more people registering and voting, and I hope that you encourage others to do the same. Second thing, work on causes bigger than yourself. Again, it doesn't matter what it is, and I'm not saying it's a Democratic or Republican cause or whatever. Just do it because it'll be very educational for you as you learn about your community and what matters to your fellow citizens. Third is time to run for office. How many of you are thinking about it someday? Okay, good. I see a number of hands going up. I think that it's time to start thinking about that. Build up the leadership muscles. Work on other people's campaigns. Work on those causes that float your boat where you don't even notice time passing. And then eventually, hopefully, you'll run for office. Maybe you'll run for city council or state house or state senate. Maybe you'll run for Congress, though not in my congressional district. But hopefully you'll run, and we'll be so much better off because you were here today. You heard what your fellow students and others had to say. You met people who disagreed with you, and that enriches your service someday to our country.
Let me build on Raj's point. We are all the beneficiaries of work that people have done before us. There's another great book. It's called A History of the American People by a British historian named Paul Johnson. And he loves Americans. And he tells our story in the most beautiful way. And he says, he talks about the founders of our country. And he said, in any other generation, it would have been amazing to have one of these people on the scene. But we had dozens of them, and you know all of these names. And then he compares it to the people who were advising King George III in England, and he said the talent difference between these two groups of people, I love this phrase, was as deep as the Atlantic that separated them. Wow. That is our heritage as Americans. And this has been passed on from one generation to another, to another, to another, to another, to another. And so the question becomes, what do we do with this gift that has been given to us? We weren't present at the founding. We didn't come up with this. But it has been turned over from one generation to another, and now it's in your lap. And the question is, what do you do about that? Do you say, no, I can't handle it. It's too big, it's too overwhelming, or it's too tough, or I'm too overwhelmed. No. You rub some dirt on it, and you say, I'm going to deal with this, and I'm going to use this gift. I'm going to be a trustee. I'm going to be a steward of this gift, and I'm going to make sure that I am passing this on to the next generation as well. Now, I'm not here suggesting that this is easy work, but previous generations of Americans have not found this to be easy work either. We're dealing with new challenges. And these challenges of cynicism and alienation and all these other things are very real. And yet, my sense is, and I know I speak for Raja, you are clearly up to this task. And it's a great joy for us to be with you today.
Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, former Congressman Peter Roskam, thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Please welcome back to the stage A Starting Point co-founders Chris Evans and Mark Kassen.
We're not sure if we're awkwardly staying here, like we should leave, or...
Thank you. You're staying.
Okay, we're staying.
You're the star. Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. That was great. Hello, Congressman. Hello, Peter. How are you? All right, everybody. So this is the fun part. We're going to hand it on over to you to get your questions for our representatives. Chris, take it away.
All right, I'll take it away. All right, so our first question comes today from Jacob from NC State. I think we should start with Congressman Krishnamurthy. Do you want to have the first response? We got Jacob. Is that Jacob right there?
What do you got, Jacob?
Sorry. Thank you. Many younger voters are concerned with the current state of U.S. politics, specifically the aggressive divide between the two major parties. Is the divide as dramatic in person, or is it exaggerated by the press?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that the press likes to cover hand grenades, not handshakes. And I think that when I came to Washington, D.C., I had to, and maybe Peter felt similarly, but I had to very quickly decide, do I want to be effective or do I want to go viral? And the closest thing I've been to being viral is I had COVID a few years ago. And so I decided I'd go the effective route. And so I wish more of my colleagues would pursue that, because if they did, I think we'd see a little bit less of that divide. The last point I make is that I think that the 24-hour news cycle does perpetuate a little bit of the coverage of the divide. And so, you know, my comms person said to me, look, if you want to get coverage, say something nasty about one of your colleagues. And, you know, I had to look at I had to look in the mirror, and that's just not the person I want to be. So, you know, we have to tolerate the others doing it, and that's what perpetuates the perception as well.
I think that there's some grifters in Congress because there's an audience for grift, and they're not evaluated on accomplishment. They're evaluated on clicks and likes and all of those sort of social media imprimaturs of approval. And the question becomes, what do we expect of our leaders? And I think that where you all can make a difference is to change the expectation. And to go back to this idea of how do you elicit from a candidate what it is that their plans are, and how do you elicit that you have an expectation that it's not just going to be about provocative sayings, but that it will be, you're going to be evaluating people based on their level of accomplishment.
The next question, let's start with you, Pete, comes from Carson from Point Park University. Carson, where are you?
Social media seems to be contributing to polarization. How can we address the challenge of social media during this time of division?
I think being on social media, to be proactive, Carson, would be an interesting thing. For you to put content out that sort of, without engaging, filling the space with the type of demeanor and disposition that you want to see on social media. And listen, I'm not here dumping all over funny things or quick entertainments and so forth. There's a role for that. But there's also a role for a voice that's more serious. And if you can do it in an organized way to sort of fill that space up, then all of a sudden I think other people who might have a similar itch that they want to scratch, but they just don't know how to scratch it, can be saying, oh, this guy's interesting to me. He's talking about things of substance. So far from saying disengage from social media, that would be a bad idea. But engaging in social media and using it as a tool to find like-minded people, I think that would be a good use of your time.
Congressman?
No, I associate myself with those remarks, as they say in the House. I think that I think the only other thing I would say is that I think the more that we are intentional about what are the good use cases for social media, where does it really help and where does it not help, and pushing us into those places where it really helps. I'll just give you an example. You know, like sometimes my wife will go online and there'll be a particular challenge that she has with, you know, she's an anesthesiologist. The joke is that we both put people to sleep. And sometimes, you know, in her physician moms group online, she'll say, hey, I have this one challenge with X, Y, or Z, and other people will jump in and give ideas and like really try to help crowdsource a solution. And I think that's so cool. And you couldn't do that as efficiently in any other way, and yet you can do it there. And I think that the more that you are the helpers online, so to speak, as in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, I think the more that also feeds a positive spiral.
Next question is from Wyatt from Georgetown. Do we have Wyatt?
Hi, it's a pleasure to be able to listen to you all. My question is, what is one issue that you think is exceptionally divisive for people or for people our age? And how do you think we as bridge builders should approach conversations about this issue?
I think we'll start with Congressman Krishnamurthy.
Do you have an easier question? Exceptionally divisive. I mean, look, I think one that's exceptionally divisive now is reproductive freedom. I think let's just be honest about it. That's something that is, ever since the Dobbs decision, has really provoked a national conversation about it. I think that the interesting thing is I think that young people can be, especially you, because I trust you. I trust all of you are very mature people and are exceptional leaders, can have honest conversations about this. And right now, we're having conversations that really, in my opinion, don't reflect who we really are as Americans in some cases. And so, you know, that's one. The second is immigration, okay? Again, I come back to this because I'm a racial, religious, and ethnic minority with 29 letters in my name. And so I care, and I'm an immigrant. And I care deeply about this. This is America's #1 killer competitive advantage over the rest of the world. It's why, as Peter said, the founders, they were the self-selected group of exceptional talents that founded this country, and that you are going to continue their legacy. But we can't solve this problem unless we have mature conversations about dealing with the border crisis, but also making sure that we have a legal immigration system that works. And you guys can talk about that very honestly, and hopefully will be part of the long-term solution, even as we're trying to do these short-term fixes right now.
Another issue that I would put in the same category is, what's America's role in the world today? There's a lot of discussion and a lot of real struggle about American self-identity on the world stage. And there's a horseshoe in American politics that's developing where two extreme sides are coming to the same conclusion. I would argue it's a bad conclusion, but two extreme sides are coming to the same conclusion. On the far right, you've got people saying, oh, America can't afford to be active on the world stage, and we're chumps, we're being taken advantage of, and so forth. On the far left, the message is America has no right to be active on the world stage, and America's not a special country, et cetera. And so while the center is holding, and a very strong majority of Americans reject both of those views and the single conclusion that they reach, that is that America should pull back, there is this weird dynamic right now where instead of having red states and blue states, we're kind of getting red countries and blue countries. Like Israel is trending to be a red country and Ukraine is trending to be a blue country. It's like, what? How did that happen? And I think we really need to be mindful of that the United States, I would submit, is a completely unique country. Other people have said this. This is not my characterization. I think Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State, characterized America as the indispensable nation. There's nobody on the world stage like the United States, and we really do have a significant role to play. And we as a country, and particularly you generationally, if you can get your feet on the ground on that question, I think it can have an incredibly significant impact in the years to come.
Those are both great. Our next question is from Remy at SUNY Cortland, right near where I went to school in Ithaca, by the way. And Peter, why don't you take this one first?
Okay. How do you balance the importance of free speech and being able to say what you believe with the desire to have respectful and productive conversations in the classroom?
So there's two things, Remy, I think, in terms of two levels to your question. One is a legal question, and that is, and the courts will figure out what we're able to say, and the fact of the matter is we're able to say a lot. The other is a personal question, and that is, how should we be interacting with one another? And I would submit to you that if you want to increase your influence over others in terms of debates, the best way to do that is to be gracious and to be cool and to be loving and to be magnanimous. Now, that doesn't have to mean that you agree with everything that someone says, but it does mean that you ought not ridicule and demean. And I think there is a real temptation right now to get into a ridicule vibe out there. And I don't care who you are, if you were to ridicule me, it would feel terrible. Now, you can tease me, that's funny. We can kid around, but when it crosses into ridicule, and we know what that is, you just kind of feel it when it becomes ridicule, then wow, the relational part completely unravels. So I think what we've seen on campuses, particularly the anti-Semitism and so forth, has been very destructive. There's no quarter for that. And the notion that these become real questions tells you we've got a long way to go. So I think setting our own personal conduct where we're interacting with one another, Remy, in a way, excuse me, that's respectful, I think it goes a long way in terms of ultimately persuading someone.
I agree with that. I think that I just have two observations. One is I think we should foster an environment where everyone can say what they think, okay? It's just that they can't say things that could lead to violence or that could lead to behavior that could be destructive, okay? And I think we all know what that means. You can't incite a riot. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. But the second part of it is, I want each of you to consider yourselves to be moderators of these conversations. What do I mean by that? You could have a strong point of view, but in a group setting, I hope that you will step in and say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about what I just said? And then if somebody says something that you disagree with, you can say, well, this is how I feel about what you said, and keep the conversation going and bring others in the fold as well. Because if we don't have that engagement, then again, people kind of get alienated. And when people get alienated, they go off into their silos and those dark corners, and that's where bad things happen. Get people engaged. Bring people into the fold, hear their opinions, and I hope that you can kind of be the curators of these discussions.
Let me just make one other quick point. It's Sunday, so the Apostle Paul wrote a letter to the church in Corinth, and in it he walked through a whole bunch of things, and then at the very beginning of the 13th chapter, what he said was, there's a more excellent way. And that's the famous love chapter. Love is patient, love is kind, and so forth. And so I think what Remy, part of the key is it goes back to something that St. Ambrose said in the 4th century. He said, we don't impose on the world. We propose a more excellent way, which was kind of a riff off of what Paul was saying. And so in that same way, I think if your demeanor and how you carry yourself in these debates is one of invitation. Say, listen, I really do want to know what you're thinking, and I want to have a real conversation with you. That can become so refreshing and life-giving, it's really breathtaking. One quick story. There was an author who got trashed by somebody online, and the author reached out to them and said, thank you so much for reading my book. You have no idea, you made my day. And over a course of months, they developed a relationship, and they became very, very good friends. Why? Because the author wasn't defensive, and I'm sure it took a lot of discipline not to be defensive, but just was with gratitude, thank you for taking the time to tell me what you think. Now I want to learn from you. You take my point. The fruit of that can be really, really significant.
Next question comes from Nisa from Stony Brook University.
Hi. So my question is, how can policymakers ensure that civic education in schools reflects diverse perspectives and encourages critical thinking about civic issues?
Congressman Krishnamurthy, you want to start?
Sure. Look, I think that's a great question again. Another of a series of great questions. I think that, first of all, I personally think that all the facts should be on the table. okay? As long as they're accurate. And there have to be fact checkers, okay? I mean, now we're talking about books that young people are reading, and I think as long as all the facts are accurate, they need to be all on the table. And by the way, I don't believe in banning books. I don't believe in banning information. I don't believe in anything that keeps out of your consideration important information for you to consume and then form your own opinions, okay? All that being said, I also think that, you know, unfortunately some of our discussions about what people should learn have become politicized, which has been a big downer for me because it's happened including in the suburbs of Chicago. I really think that parents, along with administrators, should be the ones that decide what our young people should be studying, but don't keep any information from them. Let them consume it, and then let them form their opinions, which I hope, again, inform these very good discussions which Peter and I have been talking about that you should be having and curating among yourselves.
I think we've got to make sure that we keep civic education at the center of American education. And there's a lot of pressure to crowd it out, to marginalize it. I was a kid in 4th grade that couldn't get enough of the State of Illinois section. I can still sing part of the Illinois song, which I won't do right now. 8th grade, couldn't get enough of the Constitution test. You know, it was public school that drew me into this arena. And there's pressure to sort of push that sort of civic education, 3 branches of government, and all of those things that are inextricably linked to our foundation and really inextricably linked to the type of conversations that you're having on campus. There has to be an underlying assumption that younger voters know the civics, they know the structure, they know how governance is put together and what its goals are, what it can do and what it can't do. And that all comes back to civic education.
Can I say one last thing? Democracy is not just a noun, it's a verb. It's a verb. And I think that if any of you are interested in internships in my office, let me know. Because we need you, we need a pipeline of leaders, and I know when Peter was in Congress, he probably did the same. I know my staff is looking at me funny right now, but any of you who are interested, let us know, and we'll try to get you into our program. Oh, you? You want to do an internship? We'll love it. How about Captain America? Can we get you we'll get you an outfit appropriate to the internship.
All right, last question, I believe, is from Nicholas, who goes to UCLA. And Peter, give us one to you.
Good afternoon. How do you feel that the political atmosphere has changed since President Biden dropped out of the presidential campaign? And do you feel like people are going to be any more or less willing to engage politically after this decision?
I'm of the opinion, Nicholas, that both political parties have demonstrated irrational exuberance over the past 2 weeks. So coming out of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, followed by the Republican convention and so forth, Republicans coming out of Milwaukee felt like, man, it is open field running and we're just going to take it. We're going to sweep everything and this is done. And I think the proof of that is that the choice of J.D. Vance as President Trump's running mate was not the choice of somebody who felt like, I need to expand the map, I need to appeal to new voters. It was the choice of somebody who felt like, I've got this in the bag, and this is about my legacy. Similarly, in my view, Democrats now, with the replacement of Joe Biden with the vice president, similarly are irrationally euphoric. And the money is coming in, the volunteers are coming in, and I am of the opinion that there is a whole lot of game that's going to be played out over the next couple of months. And in my experience, 100 days is like 5 lifetimes in politics. And I think this is an election that's going to be very close. So in answer to your question, I think it's energizing. I think there's a lot of people who are maybe that were Trump voters that may have said, oh, listen, he's going to win. He doesn't need my vote. Now all of a sudden they're like, wow, the map has changed and so forth. And the excitement on the side of the Harris voters is self-evident. So I am of the view that both political parties are going to be doing a lot of nail biting between now and then.
I agree. I think there's going to be a record turnout again. It just feels like that kind of election again. As you know, 67% of registered voters voted in the last election in 2020, which was at the time a record. And this time we might be pushing towards 70, you know. And I think that would be great for our democracy, honestly, if more of you and everybody else voted. And you know, we'll see where the chips fall. But right now, I think the big momentum is with Kamala.
So I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to ask you one more question. You both have been in Congress for a while. You spent a bunch of time in Congress. Is there anything that you can share that you feel that lawmakers can do to set a better example for political discourse to these folks, to the voters of the next generation?
I think the best thing lawmakers can do is to be disciplined with how they speak to one another. I was fortunate in that I was raised by two parents in a successful marriage. I know friends who didn't have that experience. And when my friends' parents would be interacting in a positive way and peaceful and loving with one another, it was this huge sense of relief for them. And I think similarly, we look at Capitol Hill and we say, wow, it would just be so nice if they were kind of cool and they could just be gracious to one another. And the fact is that there are others like Raja right now who are similarly disposed. They have his attitude, both sides of the aisle. In fact, there's hundreds of them. But the challenge is that they don't get attention. And they're not provocateurs in that way. So I think the ones who are provocative and that are firing for effect and just learning for attention, seeking attention, we would be better off if they said less and if they were more disciplined in how they interacted. But the good news is that there are people that share Raj's demeanor, and you pick it up, and you know what I'm talking about. They have his demeanor, and they're on the other side of the aisle. You know what I mean? They're all over the place philosophically, but they have an attitude of graciousness and respect with which they interact with one another.
I approve that message. That's good. Look, I think that so one of the perhaps my proudest work as of this moment in Congress is I'm the ranking member of the Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. This is the longest name of a committee in Congress. So I feel very much at home on this committee. There's a guy named Mike Gallagher who was the chair, the Republican chair from Wisconsin, and I'm the ranking member. And I would argue that this is perhaps one of the most bipartisan, most serious, most productive committees in all of Congress. Why? Because first Mike, he and I came into Congress together. First him, and then now he's been replaced by an equally gracious bipartisan guy named John Moolenaar. This is the way that we interact. We say, look, here's the list here are your 5 or 6 items that you want to do. Here's my list of 5 or 6 items. Where's the overlap? Let's start on those and then deal with the rest later. Because if we can start on the ones where we agree and build some trust, we can then build up maybe some momentum to tackle some of the harder stuff. And so what I would just say is, let's do that. Let's start on the stuff where we can agree, and then let's get to the rest later. Because if we can do that, then we can build some trust. And if we can build some trust, then we can have some of the hard conversations where we can, have some confidence that we're not going to get somehow leaked, and then we won't be able to get the harder stuff done. And so that's a tough business model in Washington, D.C., quite frankly, today, because people like to kind of call each other names, start with the hard stuff, plant their flag in the ground, get the clicks. But I would suggest that our business model on this committee, which is start with the stuff where we agree, is the more successful one long term.
So
Just
be
building on
nicer
it,
to
just
each
real
other.
quick,
So you said be nicer to each other and govern. That's what I heard. Right. Do those two things.
And let your opponent take a victory lap. When they get something done, just let them take the victory lap and get out of the zero-sum game, which is American politics. The game we play now is I win, you lose. And that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Great way to end it. Thank you. Thank you to the congressman for being so generous with your time. Thank you to the students. Thank you guys for caring, for having such good questions today. And thank you guys. And thank you to BridgeUSA. Thank you. Thank you for what you guys do.
Thank you, Bridge.
Thank you for letting us be a part of this today. We were honored.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, The Hill. Thank you, Bridge. And I'm sure you all know that the election is 100 days from today. So on the off chance that none of you are registered, there's a QR code that you can go to astartingpoint.com, and it will help you get registered. It also has all sorts of other resources to help you make your voting experience nice and easy, as well as a whole bunch of information. And even some of these guys are on it, in case you want to hear more about what they have to say and what they think about some of the things that affect our lives every day. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, guys.
Enjoy the rest of your conference.